Out of all the nations, Stoicheia is probably the one that needed the best support to make both archetypes playable or at the very least meta relevant. Let's see if set 2, A Brush with the Legends, does them any favors. Stand up! Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to the final set review of set 2 for Overdress, A Brush with the Legends. We already covered Cater Sanctuary, Dark States, Dragon Empire, and Brand Gate. If you haven't seen any of those set reviews, links on top, check them out if you are interested in one of those particular nations. But today we're going to take a look at the final one, which is of course Stoicheia. That's the nation belonging to the Magnolia ride line, as well as the infamous Zorga Alchemagic Man. And the support within the set is quite surprising because they do a couple things that I wasn't expecting them to take that direction for their respective archetypes, and I think set 2 has a lot of nice things in store for these two builds. So let's see what this set has in store for us and see how strong these two ride lines come out of this particular wave of support. But before we dive into the new support, if any of the cards that we're going to talk about today strike your fancy or you're interested in one of the other nation, then you can get your cards over at parkits.com, be it via pre-orders or maybe get your couple of boxes or even singles from the previous sets that are already on the store. But if you do that, don't forget to use the discount code TIMELEAP5 to get 5% discount on your entire order to save a couple of bucks on this somewhat expensive hobby of ours. But with that part out of the way, let's jump straight into these cards and see what set 2 has in store for Stoicheia. And we start off, of course, with the front trigger that we see for every nation, and in this case that's Frenzied Harness, and she has the new upgraded ability Continues from Guardian Circle. If your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, this unit gets shield plus 5k. It's a 5-star card, it's 20k shield, it's pretty good, it helps a lot. There's nothing really other than I need to say that we already discussed in the previous videos. Then followed up we have a new grade 1, which is Sylvanhorn Beast Crocotte, and Crocotte has the ability Autumn Rearguard Circle. When this unit attacks or boosts, costs soul plus 1, and this unit gets power plus 2k until the end of battle for each of your rearguards. Now keep in mind, this is a 6k body, so you need to pay a soul less to turn it into an 8k just like any other grade 1, which isn't that great. Luckily she counts herself, so if she's the only rearguard, you can pay a soul less to turn her into a normal grade 1. But if we have a full field, then it can be a 16k unit. And keep in mind, we're probably not going to boost in most instances, as we're going to attack with the back row units. But even then, I'm kind of not really liking this card because soul, for one, is a very important resource, and for just this little power gain, it's not really worth it because the grade 1 of the ride line is actually already as good or even better because it doesn't cost you any resources to get to 13k, as this is just a bit better than that, but doesn't really hit a better magic number. So for me, it's sadly on 1 star. I'm not really a fan of this card. Now another card that's really interesting, but potentially really good depending on what your stance is this grade 1 Deep Emotion Maiden Yulia. And Yulia has the ability Continues a rearguard circle. When you would exchange or move rearguards during the main phase, you may also move them along rows. So basically, this allows you to move your rearguards all across the field. So you can move them up and down, or you can move them side to side. Now keep in mind, you cannot do this, but you can basically swap these two, then swap these two, then swap these two, and you have this unit here, and then you can basically keep swapping to get the other unit there. It's basically with a bit of extra steps, but you can freely move your units across the board. In most instances, it doesn't really do a lot, but in very specific instances, it can help you set up a better board if you called your units in an awkward position during the game. Or for instance, we have that grade 1 from the Festival Collection that can only be placed behind the Vanguard Circle, which is a 50k booster. And if you call it there, you can move it away and call a new one from hand potentially, thus being able to capitalize more on this value. Overall, it's not too amazing, but it's an interesting option to have. And there are other cards that do somewhat synergize with this ability. But she also has a secondary effect, which is Continues a Rearguard Circle. Your units in front of this unit cannot be chosen by your opponent's effect. So a little bit of protection to your field. It is nice, but it's not too amazing because keep in mind, she isn't protected. So if your opponent can get rid of this card, they can then also get rid of the unit that it was initially protecting. So if they have multiple singular pops, they can just pop this and then pop the other, and as if nothing really happened. But in some cases, when they only have access to a field wipe, then this can be nice because it does protect that particular card in that particular instance. So with it in mind, I think it's a solid 3-star card. Like, there are some interesting things you can do with it, but it's not mind-blowing. But it can be a nice tech choice depending on your build and what type of strategy you want to employ. Now, another great one, which is once again one of those weird cards with wacky base powers and weird restrictions. We got this great one, Sylvan Hornbeast Taruf, and Taruf has the ability continues. This card cannot be ridden, called, or moved to the front row. So it can only be called to the back row. And it needs to stay there. Even with the great one we just talked about, it just stays there. Which is really awkward because it's just 11k. Yes, 11k can boost, but it doesn't make better numbers than a 10k booster unless you have a 12k attacker in front of it, but it's very specific, and I don't even think that Stoicheia has those 12k attackers outside of potentially Zorga, but I don't even think that Zorga has those. So I don't see any value behind this, and even as a back row unit, once again, just like the red one we just talked about, it has the Soulless 1 ability to gain power. You have the great one of the right line Charis, which fulfills the same amount of potential, but it's still better because it's more flexible. So yeah, this is going to be a 1-star for me once again. But now we get a great one, which is actually really interesting, as we got Sylvan Hornbeast Bilbar. And Bilbar has a unique effect that can see some potential right now, but also has some future potential, because its act on Rearguard Circle costs Soulless 1 and retire this unit. Look at the free cards on the top of your deck, choose up to 1 unit card from among them, call to the back row Rearguard Circle, and discard the rest. That called unit cannot be moved to another Rearguard Circle until the end of turn. So it's basically stuck there in the back row. If it's a great one, you don't really mind because it can boost, but if you play Magnolia, you don't really care all too much because it can attack from the back row in the right circumstances, so you're Gucci on that part. This is basically a great way to get more consistency to your whatever engine you're playing, because you're digging through your deck to specific pieces, and that means you're going to go faster through your deck, so there's more likely that you're going to see your combo pieces that you're going to need. Right now, I don't think it's all too great, because I don't feel there is a high combo potential in Stoicheia at the moment, but it does have inherent synergy with a drop zone because you're milling as well, and with the fact that there is that potential for potential future combo potential. That's a lot of potential in one singular sentence. But basically what I'm trying to say is that I think this is a solid 3-star card because it just opens up this niche potential, and I say it again, but it opens up this niche way where if we get these weird combo cards or combo decks where we need specific cards on the field, this is a great way to just increase the consistency, because besides those specific combo pieces, the rest of your deck don't really matter. So might as well just run cards that can help you to get to that combo as fast and consistent as possible, and this might do the trick. And yes, it's a 7k body, but keep in mind, it retires itself. So that number on this card actually doesn't really matter. Now, on a whole nother topic, we got once again a grid 1, but this time I'm not really sure what to think about it because it's Lady Demolish, and Lady Demolish has the ability, on a Rearguard Circle, when you attack this unit boosted hits a Vanguard, you may discard the top 5 cards of your deck, so a free mill 5 on hit. I'm on the fence about this card because I can understand the value behind milling 5 cards, especially with new cards allow you to get cards from your drop zone, and Zorga being a thing, and potentially future decks that also revolve around the drop zone. But I think we already have somewhat of a decent amount of milling in the nation, and mill 5 is quite heavy. That's easily 10 to 20% of your deck, and in some instance when this thing might go off, that might even be like 25% of your deck instantly gone. And if you cannot close the game fast enough, this can backfire against you and you might deck out. Especially in the current situation where games tend to go on longer than usual. So milling 5 can be tricky here, but we might get in a scenario where games starting to get faster and faster and faster, and then this card might actually be good to just set up your drop zone as fast as possible to get to your combo pieces and then try to kill your opponent maybe on turn 3 or turn 4. So I can see the potential of this card, but right now I can only give it 2 stars because it's too iffy right now in my opinion. Now, another card that I don't really have to explain a lot is Roaring Pistol Lagina, a grade 2, which has the ability continues on Guardian Circle. If you have a total of 3 or more order cards in your drop and bind zone, this unit gets shield plus 5k. So it's a 10k shield for free if you basically have enough orders in the place where your orders are probably going to be. Now, this has combo potential with Zorga, but it can be used in Magnolia as well because it just works with generic orders as well. I'm gonna give it 2 stars because I'm not really completely sold by this card, but it's free 5k shield. That's not easy, that's not too hard to set up, and free shields can come a long way, especially in this current format, which is a bit slower than usual. So it's alright. Now, another grade 2, which is once again kind of is Shooting Mutant Bullet Wasp, as this card has the ability, continues a Rearguard Circle. This unit can intercept on the back row. It's basically extra 5k shield for Magnolia because you're going to attack with it from the back row, and now you can intercept with it as well. Which is fine, but I don't really think that this is good enough to actually warrant its play. I'm going to give it 1 star, as it's very situational and doesn't really do all too much. Now, another grade 2, which is also very questionable right now, is Unity Brave Shooter, which is auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit attacks, costs Soul plus 2. This unit gets power plus 5k until the end of battle for each of your other rearguards. We had the grade 1, which was similar to this, but the grade 1 can count itself. This one cannot count itself, so you need to have another rearguard on the field to turn it into a 10k unit for 2 soul, which is basically a normal grade 2. Then if you have 2 other rearguards, it becomes a 15k attacker, which we already have in the likes of the grade 2 from the starter deck, but you need to have a full field for it to become a 15k attacker, but it doesn't cost you 2 soul. But in that instant, if you use this card, it can become a 25k attacker, which is quite decent. It's a sizable number. But 2 soul, it just doesn't feel right now. For that, I can want to almost say it's a 1-star card, but because it can become a quite beefy number, and with more right lines on the horizon, with the new derpy Maelstrom being a thing, and going about multi-attacking, I can see suddenly this being very important. So I want to give it 2 stars because there might be something there in the future, but it's a big if. Now, a grade 2 that's actually really interesting and can actually see some play is Coffin Shooter, and this grade 2 has the ability, act from drop zone, once a turn, cost Soul plus 1, bind an order card from drop, call this card to an open rearguard circle. It's a resurrection skill that's built in the card itself. So this is a nice way to just being able to replenish the board turn after turn after turn to just keep applying more pressure. This sounds like a Zorga card, but honestly, I think this is better in Magnolia because for Soul plus 1, a free plus is great. That also is a body on the board that allows you to attack 1 more time with the whole multi-attack potential of Magnolia. And as I explained earlier, Magnolia can play orders, and I think Magnolia is going to play orders, so this has synergy with Magnolia as well. So I like this card. It's simple, it's elegant, and it gets the job done. So I think for that, it's a solid 3-star card. It's not amazing value because it's still just a 10k beater that can sometimes not hit your opponent's Vanguard if you don't give a booster or apply power to this unit, but being able to just keep resurrecting onto the board is a nice feature in itself. Now, another grade 3, which is really iffy in my opinion, is Scuttlefish Dragon, and this is an 18k base grade 3 with the restriction continues a Vanguard to Rearguard Circle. If you did not call a Rearguard from other than hand this turn, this unit cannot attack. So you need a superior call to allow this unit to attack. I have already addressed this when this card was revealed that it has premium application because you can stride over it, but I usually rate these cards on their standard application, and for a standard application, it's a 1-star card. You might not always be able to get rid of this restriction. In Zorga probably well, because Zorga can resurrect stuff, but Zorga has already a dedicated 18k booster grade 3 from set 1, which is probably a lot better if you are not running out of resources, because you don't have to apply more resource to be able to get attacks off of it. But this card can be used in Magnolia to some extent, but I see it less likely to be a consistent beater for Magnolia because Magnolia doesn't have a lot of superior call options. It might be possible, but I'm not really sold on it. So that's why I can only give this card a max 1-star in standard variant. If we're talking about premium, it's probably more around a 2-star-ish, but even then, I don't really think it's great. But with the generic stuff out of the way, let's take a look at Magnolia specific support, as we got some interesting toys to work with for Magnolia. And we start off with an interesting grade 3, which I initially had completely wrong with the skill as it was revealed at the first time. So let's rectify that thing that I did in the past, as we got this grade 3 Sylvan Horn Beast Leta. And Leta has the ability Auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit attacks, if 2 or more units are in front of this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of that battle. And if there are 3 or more, Soul Charge 1. So What I initially thought was that it was looking at that this card needed to be in the back row, and it looked at your front row and it was counting the units that was present in your front row. That's not what this card does. It looks at the column, but it also looks at your opponent's side of the same column. So you want to have this thing in the back row, and then you have a unit in front of it, and then you want to have that your opponent has also one unit in the same column to allow this thing to get 5k power. But if your opponent has an entire column filled in the same column that you have a column entirely filled with this thing in the back row, it basically becomes a free soul charge engine, which can be nice, but as I already explained, that's a lot of hoops that you need to jump through, which can be quite awkward. That said, I think it's still a solid 3-star card, just by the sheer fact that it's probably the only good way to gain soul for Magnolia, and soul is something you really need, so I can definitely see this thing just being run for the prospect of gaining that soul, and you can easily just put it behind your Vanguard, and there's a highly likely chance that your opponent is boosting their Vanguard, so that then will mean that you will always have the soul gain of this effect. If you put it to the side column, there's a potential that they get rid of that column with specific skills, or they don't even call enough cards in that particular column. So there is some playability around it, but at the same time it also showcases how a good Stoicheia player is being able to maximize the value out of this card. Now, grade 2, which is kind of iffy, is Sylvan Hornbeast Bell Unicorn, and this card has the ability Act on Rearguard Circle, cost counter +1, and until the end of turn, this unit gets continues from back row Rearguard Circle. When this unit would attack, this unit battles all of your opponent's front row units. It's basically a Vermilion skill as you attack the entire front row. If this happens, your opponent cannot intercept with the grade 2s because they're being attacked, so this is a nice way to negate interceptors. But with the current situation, your opponent can play around this by just intercepting the moment that you attack with your Vanguard, because being able to attack with this thing from the back row, you need to first attack with Magnolia to give it the ability to attack from the back row. But you did pay the counterblast during your main phase in advance, which basically can result in the fact that you're wasting a counterblast if your opponent can just intercept the units away. Now, that said, the next card that we're going to talk about allows this card to also attack from the back row, and then being the first attack of your turn, which then allows this card to generate value from its skill. But even then, it's kind of iffy, so with it all in mind, I think I can only give it 2-star cards, because even if you get the payout, it's very marginal in the current situation, and it's kind of annoying to jump through those hoops to even get there in the first place. So it's a 2-star card for me that might see competitive play if the meta shift to a certain direction where this type of skill can be very problematic. Now, talking about the card that I just hinted at, we got this grade 2 Sylvan Hornbeast Daiminaru, and Daiminaru has the ability, although when this unit is placed on the rearguard circle, if your Vanguard is Sylvan Hornbeast King Magnolia, cost Soul Blast 1, choose one of your rearguards, and until the end of turn, that unit can attack from the back row and gets power plus 5k. So this is basically Magnolia's ability onto a rearguard, only now it doesn't have the Persona Riot power up ability, but instead of a Counter Blast, it costs a Soul Blast. This is great for early pressure, because on the first grade 3 right turn, you can only attack 4 times, but if you have this thing in your hand, you can pump it up to 5, potentially even 6, which is kind of ridiculous. And this does synergize with the grade 2 that we just talked about. So the armor synergy here, which can make things kind of juicy and really interesting. Now, if you don't want to go the full multi-attack route, what you also can do is just use this Soul Blast to give another unit that can already attack from the back row an extra 5k pump to just make sure you can hit over defensive triggers. Now, is it a lot of value? Probably not, but it's a line of play that you have access to that might definitely can break or make a game if used in the right circumstances. Now, it also has a secondary effect, which is on a rearguard circle once a turn. When this unit is chosen by your Vanguard's effect, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So basically, it's the same skill as what we see on the right line, grade 1 and grade 2, so it gets extra power when it can attack from the back row, but in this case, it needs to be selected by your Vanguard's ability, but in Magnolia's case, that then means that it can attack from the back row. So if you combine those skills together, it basically gets a power buff of 10k power, which is nice. And if we get other right line units or other boss units that can target our units, it can benefit from this, but I don't think it warrants the value of running this card in a deck that isn't Magnolia because of its first ability that is very Magnolia restricted. Overall said, however, it's a solid 5-star card, of course. It's insane. It gives you that early pressure that Magnolia lacks to some extent, and being not behind Counterblast means we have less Counterblast strain on our Magnolia effect, as well on the Care Bear itself. That's also a very prominent centerpiece within the archetype. Now, what's also a really nice card is this new grade 0 order card for Magnolia, but you can say Stoicheia to some extent, but the reason why I say Magnolia is because of the fact, play this with cost, counterblast 1, discard 3 cards from the top of your deck, choose up to 1 card from the same grade as your Vanguard or lower from your drop, and call to the rearguard circle. If your Vanguard is Sylvanhorn, Beast King, Magnolia, choose up to 2 cards instead of 1. This is an amazing card for Magnolia, because not only does it help you to flood the board, but now you can keep reoccurring those important key pieces that keep getting retired by your opponent to the board and have more consistency to your engine. For 1 counterblast on 1 discard, being able to resurrect 2 cards is actually really good for something like Magnolia. Now you can play this in Zorga to some extent because it's mill free, but resurrecting only 1 card for a counterblast and a discard might not be worth it, but maybe to some extent it does if you really want to have that extra mill. But it all comes to your preference and how you want to pilot your deck. Now, with it all said, I think this is an amazing 5-star order. Like, this is pretty good and also really nice for Magnolia. Just a way to increase the consistency of your build. It's just really, really, really strong. And it's also not that expensive that you would typically see on these type of orders. So yeah, I think Magnolia has a lot of nice tools to work with, but it has one more card that it can utilize. That card being a new grade 2 normal order, Fruitful Season, and this normal order has the ability, until the end of turn, all of your back row rearguards get power plus 5k, and you cannot move rearguards to other rearguards, and they cannot boost. This is basically an order card for the Magnolia Persona right turn. You give all your units in the back row the attack potential, and then you give them all an extra 5k power, so they hopefully get over that threshold that defensive triggers don't really matter, or that your opponent is going to waste a lot of cards from hand. This is an amazing finisher card, or at least for your final push turns, where you really want to go ham, but it's also very specific. If you don't go for that specific play and you're not playing Magnolia, it's very likely that this order doesn't really do anything. Like, I cannot really see this benefit Zorga as losing the boost. Yeah, you're not attacking from the back row, so you're not gonna benefit from this. So, with it in mind, I think it's a solid 3-star card. Like, it's very strong in the right circumstances, but that circumstance is a very narrow window of opportunity during specific games. You're not going to get a lot of value of it. If you're gonna use this and only 1 unit can attack from the back row, and you're losing the boosters to the other columns, that's not worth it. Even if you can attack with 2 units and you lose the booster on the other one, that can in some circumstances actually cost you a lot of value. So you need to be careful when you're employing this order card in a situation where you cannot attack with all your back row units. So we saw a lot of very juicy Magnolia support, but Zorga isn't left to the wayside, as Zorga also got some really nice toys to play with. And we started with the new grade 1, which is Fairy of Blighted Love, and this grade 1 has the ability Auto Rearguard Circle. When the attack this unit boosted hits a Vanguard, cost bind this unit, choose an order card from your bind zone and put it into your hand. This is actually really nice because it applies hit pressure on your attacks. You come with quite beefy attacks, and then it allows you to basically keep cycling your Alchemagic targets turn after turn after turn, because you just used Alchemagic, you bind a card, and now you get that bind target back into your hand to then basically do the same Alchemagic but then the other way around for the next turn, which is actually really good value. So with it in mind, I think it's actually a solid 3-star card. Like, it's a specific support for Zorga, and it can be a nice tech choice. I don't think it's going to be a staple, but it's going to be a fun card to play around with. Now, another card which is going to be really fun to play around with is this grade 1, Beauty Pulling the Sleeve, and she got the ability, although when this unit is placed on the rearguard circle, you may put all cards from your bind zone into the drop. If you do, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn for each card put. So this, just like the grade 1 we just talked about, is able to put those order cards in the bind zone somewhere else, and if you put them into the drop zone, they are once again targets for your Alchemagic, so that's another way to reuse the same value cards over and over and over. But while you do that, this actually becomes quite a sizable booster, or potentially an attacker. With just 1 order, it's a 12k, that's pretty decent, but if the game goes on for quite a while, then that can add up and makes it a sizable threat for your opponent to deal with. But the more important thing here is that because we're now able to get those order cards from the bind zone back into the drop on a consistent basis, as we can just keep resurrecting this grade 1 turn after turn after turn, that allows us to potentially play with less order cards, as we're able to gain way more value out of one particular order, as we can reuse them over and over and over again. So if we can just set up a little bit, we actually are golden for the entire game, which is actually really great. So with it in mind, I think it's a solid 4-star card that opens up a lot of interesting options, and in itself as a power beater, it gets the job done. Now, another very amazing grade 1 card, and we keep scaling up in these grade 1s, as we had a 3-star, a 4-star, so you would expect a 5-star. Well, for that potential 5-star, we got Rogue Headhunter, and Rogue Headhunter, oh boy, it's a good one, because it got Continuous Rigid Circle. If you played an order this turn, this unit gets power plus 5k, so it's a 13k booster or beater during your order turns or alchemagic turns, so it's basically a better ranker chain, as that is just a 10k body, this is a 13k body. But it also has the ability, although when a unit is placed on a rearguard circle, the next time you would alchemagic an order and play it this turn, reduce the cost by counterblast 1. So this allows us to reduce the counterblast cost. We already had the grade 2 from last set that can negate the entire soul blast cost. This is another way to make our orders a lot cheaper. And interesting enough, it's just on place, so just like the previous grade 1, we can reuse this every time with Zorga. Every single turn we can resurrect it and keep getting the counterblast refunded. And in Zorga's case, because the resurrect skill costs a counterblast, if we resurrect this card, we then potentially refund that counterblast cost for Zorga, because the next counterblast that we use with the order cards is then negated. That's actually really good value, so I like that interaction quite a lot. So yeah, this is a solid 5-star card. I was hold true to the statement that we're going up and up and up in the grade 1s. But as soon as we go to grade 2s, we have to lower the skills a bit, because the next grade 2, yeah, I'm not really a fan of it, but I know for some reason other players are excited about this card. But let's take a look for it and you can decide for yourself what you think about this card. So the new grade 2 that we're talking about is Fleet Eater. This grade 2 has a skill on a rearguard circle. When this unit attacks, if you alchemagic an order this turn, costs Soul Blast 1, and until the end of the battle, this unit gets power plus 5k, and when your opponent would call cards from their hand to the Guardian Circle, they must call 2 or more at the same time. So, it's a 15k beater for a Soul Blast that then also gets a Battle Door effect, but you need to alchemagic that turn. The 15k beater for a Soul Blast Battle Door effect, it's fine because it does force your opponent to waste more cards, but the problem that I have with this card is that you need alchemagic this turn to even be eligible to use this effect. Usually, if you alchemagic, that turn you're going to generate power columns with all your special units that will gain extra additional powers, and you have these order cards now that can give units buttload of power. In that sense, they already are better than a Battle Door effect, because they probably will force more cards from your opponent's hands unless they have the Overtrigger or the Perfect Guard, but it's very situational. So with it in mind, I'm not really a fan of this card. I don't really see a lot of value behind it. If the alchemagic restriction was removed from it and was just on attack Soul Blast 1 to gain 5k power and a Battle Door effect, then would be on board, because then in those situations where you couldn't alchemagic, this is still a solid target to still apply pressure on your opponent. But sadly, it isn't. So for me, it's going to be a 2-star card, but if you like the card and you think it can help you in your certain scenarios, definitely give the card a try, because I know there is some buzz around this card, but I'm not one of those guys that makes the buzz for this particular card. Now, another card which is actually really interesting and can see some play, but it's questionable right now, is this grade 3 Iron Anchor Resentment Dragon. And basically what it is, it's a budget Zorga, because its ability is Continuous Vanguard Circle. When you would play a normal order, you can bind a normal order with the same card name from your drop and alchemagic. So it's another grade 3 boss unit that can alchemagic, so it allows you to play all the cards that support it. The interesting thing, however, with this card is that instead of being able to alchemagic with 2 different cards, because Zorga needs to use 2 different named order cards, this specifically needs to double up in the same order. Now, this opens up different lines of play that Zorga doesn't be able to do, but at the same time, certain lines of plays are out of reach for this card, because certain orders cannot really double up all too well. Like, we had the Soul Blast 2 to mill the top 4 and to resurrect 1 or 2 cards. If you double up on that one, and you cannot negate the Soul Blast cost, there's no way you're gonna Soul Blast 4, they're hardly to be able to pay that. But even if you were able to do that, you're gonna mill 8 cards from your deck. Milling 8 is pretty dangerous, especially seeing as this build does look like a weaker version of Zorga, so you're probably gonna stall the game up longer than Zorga and then suddenly milling 8 cards? Yeah, that's pretty dangerous, or at least you need to be very courageous to even go that route. But I can see some potential within this card because you can use it as a one-off in your Zorga build to just plop it onto the Vanguard circle in certain situation where you want to double up in order to just generate the finishing blow. Like if you double up on the new order we're going to talk about that can give crits to rearguards, that can be dangerous, or some other plays. So with it all in mind, I think I can give it 2 stars. Like, it sounds low, but keep in mind, it doesn't really do a lot in most scenarios. It's a very specific card, and it's even in that sentiment, it might not even see any play in Zorga at all, as probably staying on Zorga will give you more value in the long run anyway. So I'm being realistic here. I don't really see a lot of potential, but who knows? Maybe with other lines of plays, and suddenly this card might do something, but I can only see this at maximum being a budget build for Stoicheia's Alchemagic variant. Now, I've been talking and alluding about these new orders quite a bit, so let's take a look at 3 new order cards for Stoicheia, or should I say Zorga, but maybe Magnolia can benefit from them a little bit, and they're all normal orders. And we start off with a grade 1, which is Overcoming the Unnatural Death. And this normal order has the ability, play this with cost, countable as 1, bind this card, choose up to 2 normal orders cards from your drop, and put them into your hand. So this is yet another card that allows us to refund our order cards and being able to increase the consistency of our builds. We saw the cards that allow us to put the order card from the bind zone into the drop. Now we are able to put them into our hand. And this is actually really nice with Alchemagic, because if you combine these cards together, if you set up your drop zone with 4 to 5 order cards, you're basically golden for the entire game, and you don't need any other order cards even to play with, because you can just Alchemagic with this card every single time, keep generating those order cards back into your hand so you have targets to start your Alchemagic, and with those other cards you can keep sending those cards from the bind back into the drop to always have those targets, and to also be able to use this order card every single time the moment that you're running out of order cards in your hand. This is a nice engine where you can just keep using these things over and over and over again, which is kind of interesting. And at the same time, this card doesn't specify that you need to put normal orders in your hand, so you can even fetch blitz orders in certain situations where you want to maybe get Ghost Chase to your hand, which is still a very powerful card. So with it in mind, I can see definitely a lot of potential in this card. I'm gonna give it 3 stars. Yes, I'm aware to be able to use this card you need to have a specific setup in your drop zone, because if you're going to Alchemagic with this card, you're going to need to bind a card from your drop, there's 1 order, and then you need to choose 2 cards from the drop as well to put into your hand. But if you want the Alchemagic next turn, there still needs to be another order in the drop zone, because the card that you just used for the Alchemagic is also going to be bound. So you need to have 4 cards in your drop zone the moment you activate this order card, even during an Alchemagic turn. Otherwise, you're not being able to use Alchemagic next turn. So that's the only drawback about this card. But if you can set it up and you have that other grade 1 to your disposal, you have basically an infinite engine on your hands. Now, another order card, this time a grade 2, which is also really interesting, is Nectar of Sensation. And this gives Zorga quite a pushing power, as it has the ability to choose 1 of your rearguards. Until the end of turn, it gets power plus 5k for every 5 cards in your drop, and if your drop has 15 or more cards, it gets critical plus 1. So this is a powerhouse that also puts criticals on your units. That's actually really good, and it's effectively free. It's just a discard for the order. So yeah, for me, this is going to be a 4-star card. Like, I don't really have to explain why this is good. The moment you get the crit, you give the unit plus 15, but it can potentially go further beyond that, because if you have 20, it's plus 20, if you have 25, it's plus 25, and this goes on and on and on. And this is the reason why the budget variant of Zorga can be really good, because you double up on this card and you give both your side columns plus a buttload of power and plus a critical, so suddenly, even though you only have 3 attacks, you still have crit pressure, thus still being able to apply the same amount of pressure that other cards or other decks can do with their multi-attacks. So it's a pretty good order. Now, another order card, which is really ridiculous in my opinion, is this grade 3 normal order, Regurgitation from the Underworld. And it has the ability, play this with cost, countable as 1, and sold as 1, choose 1 of any player's rearguards, retire it, and choose up to 1 card with the same grade as that card from your drop and call to the rearguard circle. If, during Alchemagic, you may choose up to 2 instead of 1 to call. This is basically Zodiac Timebeast engine in a Zorga order card. there's no reason for me not to love this card. It's pretty good. Like, it costs you discard a counterblast and soul blast to turn 1 unit into 2, which in most instances doesn't really sound like a lot of value, because if you're going to sacrifice your own units, you only +1, so that's actually way too overcosted. But you can set up quite a nice field if you sack a grade 2 and you get 2 grade 2s, and then you can suddenly turn into 2 very good grade 2s. But you can target your opponent's units. So if your opponent has a grade 3 or a grade 2 on the field, or maybe a grade 1, you can then sack one of their units to gain 2 units, and then it's actually insane value, because you go actually +3 on your opponent on that moment, because they lose 1 but you gain 2. You do that for 1 discard, 1 counterblast, and 1 soul blast. If that's the case, then this card is an insane 5-star card. However, it's going to be 4-star. The reason why that's the case, because not always does your opponent has the right units on the field, and more importantly, you need to have those units in your drop zone. If your drop zone isn't set up for this skill is really underwhelming. It all comes down to, do you have the cards in your drop zone to facilitate these plays? The reason why this skill in Zodiac Timepiece, or let's say Gear Chronicle in general, is way better, is because Gear Chronicle does it via the deck. And they do it in the early game, on the very first grade 3s and the first strike turns. And usually in the early game, most of your cards are in your deck. So you have the higher consistency of gaining the best card to your disposal if they are still targeting your deck. In this case, it targets the drop zone, so this card comes better and better as the game progresses. But in the early to mid game, it's a bit lackluster. So with it all in mind, I think it's a fine 4-star card that becomes better as the game goes on and on and on. And with it said, it also concludes all the new support that we got for Stoicheia. Overall, I am very pleasantly surprised about the support that they got, because Zorga as well as Magnolia got some very nice tools to upgrade the builds that they were already building upon, as we saw in set 1, as to basically give a comparison to what we discussed last time with the Brentgate support. They basically took the already existing engines and gave them a little bit of a nudge in a different direction, but with good support. In this case, they took the same approach, but just made it just better in all senses, which honestly, I cannot complain with. It's nice. It's really good. Zorga, once again, looks like a sweet engine with all these interesting things that we can do. We got this somewhat of a pseudo-infinite value engine that we can utilize with putting cards back from the bind into the drop, and from the drop back into our hand to have infinite alchemagic targets. And of course, Regurgitation of the Underworld. It's a Zodiac Timepiece card. There's no reason for me not to love the card. I already was interested about Zorga, and now that Zorga is becoming Zodiac Timepiece, it makes it even better. Now, the only thing that Bushiroad can do to make me absolutely happy is to just give me a Gear Chronicle route line. But as soon as this thing comes, I probably have to wait till next year for that. But besides that, I'm very curious of what cards you guys are the most interested about for this support wave, what you're going to upgrade your decks with for your Magnolia or potential Zorga build. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below, which cards are your favorites or which deck choice you're going to add, as there's a lot of interesting cards within this set. But with that said, this video has been brought to you by lovely patrons over patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!